He smiled through the lights, through the laughter, through every fake apology handed to him under the glint of a late-night desk. But tonight, Michael B. Jordan isn't just here to promote a movie, he's here to cash in a decade-old receipt. What happens when you push the wrong man off your guest list, then invite him back to roast you? And what if the roast isn't a joke at all? Stay tuned, because after this segment, you'll never watch live TV the same way again. Underneath the slick veneer of late-night television, where jokes are scripted and spontaneity is an illusion crafted by seasoned producers, a silent battle was brewing, a personal vendetta that had been aging like fine wine behind Hollywood's glitzy curtains. Michael B. Jordan, a name synonymous with blockbuster franchises and unapologetic charisma, wasn't just stepping onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage as another A-lister on a promo tour. No, this was something else. Something far more calculated. It had taken years, but tonight was the night he would deliver the perfect punchline to a joke only he had been rehearsing. A joke that ended with Jimmy Kimmel's reputation wobbling like a late-night coffee mug on a collapsing desk. The green room was tense, unusually so. Michael's team had asked for full creative freedom, including the ability to run a surprise segment. The producers, eager for a ratings bump, agreed without hesitation. After all, what could go wrong with Michael B. Jordan? America's sweetheart. People called him. But they didn't know about the grudge. No one did. Not even Michael's closest circle fully grasped how deeply that one seemingly small moment years ago had stayed with him. A memory so petty in the eyes of others, yet so personally insulting, it became the ember that burned quietly behind his success. That night when he, a young, hungry actor with a breakthrough film on the horizon, was bumped from Jimmy's guest list at the last minute. Not for scheduling conflicts. Not for news emergencies. But because another celebrity had walked in, someone deemed more exciting. Michael had waited in a suit, smiling, nodding, apologizing to fans in the hallway as producers awkwardly escorted him out. And so, for nearly a decade, Michael never returned to the show. He played the game, appeared on Fallon, Colbert, even Conan. But Jimmy's name stayed off the list, until now. With a new film setting box office records and media clamor at an all-time high, Jimmy Kimmel's team sent the invitation. It came wrapped in flattery. "Let's do something fun," the email read, a roast-style bit. "You and Jimmy, toe-to-toe, playful jabs, the fans will eat it up." Michael read it twice. Then smiled. He said yes. The show's writers prepped punchlines for Jimmy, but Michael wrote his own, silent, secret, unrehearsed. When he arrived at the studio, everything seemed normal. Hugs, rehearsals, makeup, stage blocking. Jimmy greeted him with that signature smirk, that comfortable confidence born from years of running the room. Michael gave nothing away, just his signature grin, camera-ready and effortless. But in the pocket of his blazer, he carried something no one had cleared. A USB drive. And on it, a clip that would shatter the illusion of Jimmy's clean-cut brand with the kind of comedic timing only real-life karma could deliver. Backstage, the studio buzzed with anticipation. The crowd was packed, the teleprompters loaded. Jimmy leaned into his monologue, the audience roared, and the cameras rolled. But something in the air felt electric. Unstable. A fuse had been lit, and only one man knew it was about to blow. And when it did, the difference between a joke and a takedown would no longer matter. It would all unfold live, without edits, without delay. Just raw, televised retribution masquerading as comedy. A performance not even Hollywood's best writers could have predicted. Long before the world came to know Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, as Adonis Creed, as a powerhouse both on screen and off, it was just Michael. A kid from Newark with a dream too big for his zip code, grinding through auditions, pushing through rejection, and fighting for every inch of visibility in a town that rarely handed it to black actors without preconditions. He was never loud about his ambitions, but he burned with them. And it was in those early years, before the magazine covers, before the Emmy nods and Forbes lists, that a single moment crystallized into a scar he never fully let go of. It wasn't a public failure or a box office flop. It was the night he sat in a green room for a show he'd long idolized, his name finally scheduled to appear on the marquee. That night was supposed to be his validation. And it was stolen with a smile. It had been a last-minute swap, The kind that's brushed off as normal in the entertainment industry. Another actor, whiter, funnier, with more viral heat, showed up, and suddenly Michael's segment was moved. He remembered the wording precisely. "We're gonna have to move you, man. Sorry." No explanation. No promise to reschedule. Just a handler gesturing at the exit like it wasn't a big deal. Michael nodded then, even laughed it off. But inside, something curdled. Not just because of the public slight, but because moments before the snub, he'd overheard Jimmy in the hallway, not knowing his MIC was still hot. "This kid's boring. Nothing to say. Put the other guy on." That offhand dismissal, so casual, so cruel, hit harder than any review ever could. Because Jimmy didn't just cancel his appearance. He cancelled his voice. From that night forward, Michael learned the value of silence. Not submission, but strategic silence. Let the world believe you're unbothered while you build a kingdom brick by brick. He carried that green room echo into every audition, every meeting. And when success finally came, when directors fought for his name, he made a list. Not of people to thank, but of those who underestimated him. Jimmy's name wasn't at the top, but it was written in ink. As Michael's influence grew, so did his control. He began producing, creating, shaping narratives, not just playing them. He turned down interviews with Kimmel's show multiple times over the years, always with a polite scheduling conflict. But the truth was simpler. He remembered. Not the slight, but the tone. The tone of a man who didn't think twice before cutting down someone still trying to rise. And while the world saw Michael's ascent as clean, polished, and humble, what they didn't see was how precisely calculated it had been. Every decision, every appearance, every brand deal. He knew image was power. And so, when the opportunity came to appear on Kimmel's show again, this time on his terms, Michael didn't hesitate. But he didn't rage. He didn't rant. He crafted. He planned. He found the footage. Because when you live in Hollywood long enough, you learn that everything is recorded somewhere. And one of Jimmy's ex-producers, who had left under ugly circumstances, had reached out months ago, anonymously, with a file Michael never expected to see again. The green room clip. Audio and video. The raw, unedited truth. Jimmy's voice, laughing, mocking, dismissing him like a line item on a schedule. That file became Michael's ace. Not to expose Jimmy out of anger, but to reveal what so many young actors feared, that behind the jokes were judgments, and behind the compliments, calculations. Michael never shared that clip. Not until now. Not until it could land exactly where it would sting most, on Jimmy's own turf, in front of millions. That was the beauty of patience. He'd waited long enough for the world to love him before showing them the man who once called him boring. The public adored Jimmy for his wit, for his political commentary, for his everyman charm. But Michael knew something the world hadn't seen yet. He knew how powerful it could be to turn the lights up just a little brighter, just enough to reveal what was lurking behind the punchlines. And so he said yes to the show, not out of malice, but because some truths deserve a laugh track before the gasp. The day of the appearance, Michael rehearsed lines with his team, but only for the producer's benefit. The real material lived in his memory, in that single night that rewrote his relationship with fame. He'd learned that Hollywood forgives almost anything, scandals, breakups, even lies. But what it never forgets is when someone dares to pull off the mask. He wasn't going to scream or accuse. He was going to make it funny. Brutal, yes, but funny. Because the most unforgettable burns are the ones that make the room laugh before it goes dead quiet. That was Michael's mission. And tonight, Jimmy wouldn't see it coming until it was already too late. The email arrived with all the gloss of Hollywood politeness. Charming, upbeat, oozing admiration. "We'd love to have Michael back on the show," it read. "Let's make it a fun, energetic night. We're planning a roast your host style segment. Totally light-hearted. Jimmy's excited." Michael stared at the message for a long minute, not because the offer surprised him, but because it confirmed something he already suspected. They thought he'd forgotten. Or worse, forgiven. The timing was too perfect. His film had shattered opening weekend records, his star was burning brighter than ever, and now Jimmy wanted a slice of the flame he once dismissed. The irony practically wrote itself. Michael clicked reply, typed a one-word answer, "Sure," and hit send. What Jimmy and his team didn't know was that in the weeks leading up to the taping, Michael orchestrated a masterstroke. He contacted his personal editor under an NDA so airtight it could choke a courtroom. He delivered the old green room footage, clipped, cleaned, and formatted perfectly for broadcast screens. He wrote a set of punchlines that sounded innocent, layered with charm, but each hiding a shard of glass beneath the velvet. He ran lines not with a comedy coach, but with a crisis PR expert, preparing not for laughs but for the potential fallout. This wasn't a PR tour stop. This was a surgical strike wrapped in applause. On the day of the taping, he arrived 3 hours early. Not out of nervousness, but to control the space. He greeted the staff warmly, shook hands with the interns, and even complimented the lighting crew, everyone but Jimmy. He made no attempt to engage the host before cameras rolled. That was part of the show, too. The anticipation. The build-up. The moment Jimmy would reach out for a casual, bro-style hug, only to be met with something colder than he remembered. Michael wasn't rude. He was focused. Calm. The kind of calm that only made producers more nervous. In the pre-show huddle, the segment was confirmed. Jimmy would kick off with a few self-deprecating jokes, toss the floor to Michael, and let the guest roast him lightly before returning to standard interview beats. What Jimmy didn't anticipate was how precisely Michael had timed his narrative. He'd woven it to follow the natural structure of comedy, escalating tension with each laugh. The first few jabs were subtle. Jokes about Jimmy's age, his never-changing haircut, his awkward dance with Gen Z slang. The audience laughed comfortably. Jimmy grinned, playing along. Everything felt safe. But then Michael shifted tone ever so slightly. "I almost didn't come back here," he said, his smile never wavering. "Last time I was scheduled to be on, I was told there was someone more exciting. I was sitting right there, in that green room." The crowd chuckled nervously. Jimmy squirmed, chuckling, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, man, don't take that personally. We've bumped George Clooney before." Michael paused just long enough to let the tension breathe, then delivered the first real blow. "Yeah, but I don't think George heard you call him boring through the wall." A hush rolled through the studio, followed by scattered laughter, unsure, hesitant. Jimmy's smile faltered. "Wait, what?" he asked, playing confused, his eyes scanning the crowd for assurance. Michael nodded. "You said, and I quote, 'This kid's boring. Nothing to say. Put the other guy on.'" "It's okay. You probably don't remember." The tone was warm. The words were not. Jimmy tried to pivot. Hey, it's late night. We're always scrambling, it's not personal." Michael didn't miss a beat. No, it's not personal. It's just live now." And with that, he reached into his blazer, pulled out a small remote, and pointed it toward the screen behind them. Producers panicked in the control room. The director whispered frantically into headsets. But it was too late. The screen lit up, and the footage played. The grainy security-style video showed a younger Michael sitting patiently in the green room, scrolling on his phone, checking his tie. Moments later, Jimmy passed by the doorway, laughing with a producer. The audio crackled to life. "We're really putting that kid on. He's got no stories. Nobody's gonna care." The clip ended. Silence engulfed the studio. Jimmy's face drained of color. The audience, unsure whether it was all still a bit, didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. A few people clapped. Others looked around in disbelief. Michael sat back in his chair, unbothered. "I'm glad you invited me back," he said. "This was fun." The crowd finally broke into thunderous applause. Not just for the punchline, but for the precision. The audacity. The control. This wasn't just a segment gone rogue. It was a story coming full circle. And Michael had made sure every camera was rolling, every angle captured, every breath counted. The control room tried to cut to commercial. Jimmy waved them off, his voice shaky. "Okay, wow. So you've been waiting for this moment, huh?" Michael smiled again, like a man sipping tea in the ruins of a castle he just set on fire. "Not waiting. Just choosing the right night. The audience erupted. Twitter exploded within seconds. The hashtag #KimmelGotJordaned trended worldwide before the segment even ended. What was meant to be harmless banter became a moment of reckoning, live, unfiltered, unforgettable. The seconds after the clip aired stretched longer than any segment Jimmy Kimmel had ever hosted. The laughter that followed Michael's mic drop delivery was wild at first, half disbelief, half exhilaration, but quickly fell into an uneasy rhythm, like a crowd unsure whether they were watching a triumph or a tragedy. Jimmy's trademark wit stuttered, flickering like a bulb on its last filament. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and cracked a feeble joke about being caught in 4K. But the damage had been done, and everyone knew it. The crowd sensed it. The production staff behind the camera knew it. And Michael, still calm, still smiling, sat in the middle of it all like a storm's quiet eye. This wasn't an actor lashing out or losing control. This was surgical, deliberate, and the weight of its precision began to settle in on everyone in the room. For years, Michael had studied how power moved in Hollywood, not just who held it, but how they wielded it. He knew that the true titans of this business weren't loud, they were calculating. They didn't scream, they smiled while tightening the screws. And so this wasn't just personal revenge, it was a message. Not just to Jimmy, but to every gatekeeper who had ever disguised cruelty as just business, every executive who patted a shoulder while swinging the axe with the other hand. And yet, as Michael looked into the cameras, as he soaked in the applause and the growing tension like a seasoned performer at the climax of a play, something inside him wrestled for space. He hadn't expected the moment to feel this heavy. Not triumphant, complicated. Because the truth was, Jimmy wasn't the only one whose reputation stood on a knife's edge. Michael, too, was playing with fire. The industry could celebrate truth, but only when it was convenient. When it didn't rattle too many cages. When it stayed inside the box labeled entertainment. If his performance tonight veered too far from funny into bitter, too far from roast into reckoning, the crowd might turn. The press might reframe it. They'd call him petty, ungrateful, vindictive. And worse, some might say he'd broken the unspoken contract between guests and hosts, that the seat across from the desk was sacred ground, where civility was king and ratings were God. But Michael wasn't here to play by those old rules. He came to write new ones. Still, backstage, his team wasn't celebrating yet. His publicist watched through a crack in the curtain, chewing a fingernail down to the quick. His manager paced, muttering potential headlines under her breath, calculating the cost. And in the control room, the director held a trembling finger over the cut to commercial button like it was a nuclear trigger. But Michael kept talking. Not angrily. Not mockingly. Just truthfully. He pivoted the conversation, surprisingly, to empathy. "We all grow," he said to Jimmy, whose smile was now a full-body effort. "We all mess up. But I think sometimes we forget that the people we dismiss the quickest are the ones who remember the longest." That line hit differently. The crowd quieted again. This time not out of tension, but reflection. Even Jimmy, to his credit, gave a small nod. "Fair," he mumbled, tapping his desk. But he still looked off balance, like a man who'd spent his whole career on a high wire and just realized the net below him was fraying. And Michael, sensing the shift, leaned forward. He could have ended it right there, made his point, dropped his line, and left with a hero's applause. But he didn't. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about clarity. He looked at Jimmy and said, "I didn't come here to ruin you. I came here to remind you that words matter. That moments matter. That sometimes, the people we think are too quiet to matter end up holding the loudest echo." That was the turning point. The room didn't erupt this time. It sighed. Like a collective exhale of something unspeakably real. The audience, for the first time that night, wasn't just entertained, they were moved. And Jimmy, for all his quick wit and years of experience, had no comeback. Just silence. Which, on live television, speaks louder than any monologue. But even in that moment of reflection, Michael was aware of the game still being played. He knew that redemption arcs were prized in media, that conflict sells but closure cements. So he offered Jimmy an out, not with words, but with tone. He softened. He let his posture relax. He cracked a smile that said, "We can walk away from this with dignity, if you let us." And Jimmy, sensing the olive branch, leaned in too. "You got me, man," he said, laughing nervously. That was a masterclass." The audience clapped again, unsure if they were celebrating peace or just grateful the tension had passed. Either way, the segment continued. Jokes resumed. The interview moved forward. But everything had changed. Michael left the stage with applause ringing in his ears, but his mind wasn't on the cheers. It was on the quiet that followed. On the choice he made not to go for the throat, even when it was exposed. He could have humiliated Jimmy entirely. He didn't. And that restraint, public, visible, undeniable, said more about his character than any revenge plot ever could. The lesson wasn't just about who held the power in the room. It was about who chose how to use it. And in that moral crossroads, Michael had made his decision with the world watching. Not just to win, but to elevate. Just when the air had begun to settle, when the tension had thinned into something more bearable, Michael shifted gears again. This time so subtly that not even the crew knew it was coming. The audience was still buzzing, still whispering to each other as the interview continued into safer territory. Jimmy, trying to reclaim rhythm, had cracked a few familiar jokes, attempting to reassert control with charm and timing. Michael played along just enough to lull everyone into thinking the storm had passed. But what no one realized, what not even the producers had accounted for, was that the real detonation hadn't happened yet. The earlier clip was just the fuse. The real explosion came next, and it was disguised in laughter, embedded within one final joke that wasn't a joke at all. "So," Jimmy said, flipping his note card as if trying to reset the tone, "I hear you brought something special with you tonight, besides that little green room surprise." The audience laughed, and Jimmy turned to the camera. "Michael says he has a deleted scene he wants to share. Apparently, I make a guest appearance." More laughter. Michael nodded slowly. "Oh, it's a short one. But it's powerful. Think of it as a callback." He gave the control room a subtle signal, and the screen behind them lit up again. Not with old security footage this time, but with something far more recent. Something recorded only weeks ago, leaked quietly, anonymously, and never intended to see the light of day. It began innocently enough, a rehearsal video from another late-night taping, behind-the-scenes footage showing Jimmy joking with his staff. But this wasn't the affable, camera-ready version of Jimmy. This was a version the public didn't know, sharp-tongued, arrogant, mocking. In the clip, he was watching a segment from another show where Michael had been praised for his activism and intelligence. "Oh please," Jimmy scoffed in the video. "He's got a team writing all that woke crap. He's an actor, not an activist. These guys get too much credit for reading lines off cue cards." The room on screen laughed nervously. One of his writers tried to change the subject. Jimmy kept going. "He's just riding the wave. If he wasn't jacked and pretty, nobody would care." The laughter in the live studio evaporated. Just like that. Not a breath. Not a cough. Nothing but stunned silence. Jimmy's face froze. He stared at the screen as if trying to blink it away. Wait, what is that?" he asked, but his voice was already cracking. Michael leaned in again, this time with no smile. "That's not from 10 years ago. That's from last month. And before you say it's taken out of context or a joke, tell me, how many jokes do you make when the cameras aren't rolling?" Jimmy tried to speak. Couldn't. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't know that was recorded," he finally said, as if that changed anything. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't boo either. They just stared, stunned, betrayed. Because for years, Jimmy had built his brand on progressivism, on empathy, on punching up. He cried on air about school shootings. He stood for healthcare. He branded himself the moral voice of late night. And now, with just a few minutes of unreleased footage, Michael had revealed the fracture in the facade. It wasn't an assassination, it was a reveal. Like pulling back the curtain an ounce and showing the scared little man at the controls. But Michael didn't gloat. He didn't laugh. He simply said, "You taught me something, Jimmy. That if people are going to laugh at your jokes, they deserve to know who you really are when the lights are off. The crew scrambled again. One producer started yelling into her headset. Someone in the control room killed the screen feed. But the damage was done. The room was split, not into supporters and critics, but into those who had always suspected and those who now could never unsee it. Jimmy tried to apologize, to stumble into something resembling accountability. I didn't mean, look, we all vent, but even his voice betrayed him. It was the first time in a decade he looked like a guest on his own show. Awkward, defensive, unprepared. Michael adjusted his seat, leaned forward, and delivered the final twist, not to Jimmy, but to the camera. Here's the thing about truth, he said, his voice even. It doesn't need a laugh track. It just needs space. He held that space for a long, pregnant moment. Then he smiled, not a smirk, not a performance, but a genuine smile, the kind you give when a weight has been lifted. Let's cut to commercial, he said softly. And for once, Jimmy didn't argue. The screen faded, and social media ignited like wildfire. Clips of the second reveal hit every platform in minutes. Think pieces sprang up by the hour. Old interviews were re-examined. Other celebrities, quietly at first, then more openly, began sharing their own uncomfortable stories about Kimmel's off-camera behavior. The narrative shifted with seismic speed. And in the eye of it all, Michael said nothing more. No follow-up post. No interviews. No gloating tweet. He didn't have to. He had made his point with precision and elegance, a masterclass in speaking volumes while saying very little. The kind of twist that doesn't just change the story, it rewrites the ending entirely. When the show returned from commercial break, the set felt fundamentally altered. The lights were still bright, the audience still seated, the cameras still rolling, but the illusion of control was gone. Jimmy Kimmel returned to his desk visibly rattled, his signature banter subdued, his laugh uncertain and brittle. For a host who made his living navigating the edge between satire and sincerity, he now found himself stranded, unsure which tone to strike or whether striking any tone at all could salvage what had just unraveled on live television. Across from him, Michael B. Jordan was the picture of calm, sipping water like a man who had already delivered the closing argument of a trial he didn't expect to lose. And in many ways, he hadn't just won, he'd rewritten the script. The remaining minutes of the interview limped forward, Jimmy asking vague, softball questions about the upcoming film, Michael answering them with professional ease. But everyone knew the segment was over. The real interview had already taken place, not with talking points or trailers, but with receipts and silence. When the cameras finally cut and the credits rolled, Jimmy stood, offered a handshake, and Michael, gracious to the end, took it, his expression unreadable. No lingering stare, no whispered final blow. Just a nod, polite and distant, like a man clocking out after a job well done. He left the studio through a side exit, no entourage, no press trailing him down the corridor. Outside, the night air greeted him with a kind of stillness only earned after a storm. The fallout was immediate. Overnight, the clip of the deleted scene racked up tens of millions of views. Hashtags trended worldwide. Think pieces flooded the digital landscape, some hailing Michael as a truth-teller dismantling the hypocritical ecosystem of late-night television, others questioning the ethics of airing private footage for public reckoning. But what stood out more than the commentary was the silence that followed it. Jimmy didn't tweet. He didn't issue a statement. For the first time in his career, the joke wasn't his to deliver. The network remained quiet too, scrambling behind the scenes, unsure whether to backpedal, to defend, or to distance. Meanwhile, Michael remained conspicuously absent from the noise. No victory lap, no interviews, no reaction posts. He let the moment speak for itself. And in doing so, he amplified it. In Hollywood, where even silence is often scripted, his refusal to gloat was perhaps the loudest choice he could have made. When asked about it days later at a film junket, he simply said, "I said what I needed to say. The rest is up to the audience." That was all. No elaboration. No shade. Just closure, delivered with poise. But perhaps the most unexpected twist came not from the headlines, but from the aftermath within the industry. Other celebrities began reaching out, privately at first, then publicly, echoing their own experiences with the late-night circuit, recounting moments where they too felt dismissed, manipulated, tokenized. Some shared clips. Others offered quiet solidarity. A few even opted out of future appearances on certain talk shows entirely. The revelation Michael had triggered didn't just shift a conversation, it shifted a culture. And without ever once yelling, without burning bridges, he had planted a flag in the ground and declared, "This is what accountability looks like when it's done with precision instead of vengeance." The show continued, of course. Jimmy returned the following night, noticeably subdued, making jokes that felt slightly off rhythm, slightly self-conscious. His next monologue began with a half apology, framed as comedy, of course, but the laughter was softer. Some of the spark had left the room. The audience had seen behind the curtain, and once that happens, it's hard to pretend the magic's still there. The set was the same, but the myth had changed. And though Jimmy remained at the desk, the question lingered, at what cost? Meanwhile, Michael's career only accelerated. Studios praised him for his poise. Fans hailed him as a new kind of leading man, not just on screen, but in the way he wielded influence. And quietly, without fanfare, he began developing a new project. Not a film, not a series, but a digital show under his own production banner. An unscripted, unfiltered conversation series. One where the power dynamics were reversed, where guests set the tone, and where hosts asked real questions without pre-written punchlines. When the teaser trailer dropped months later, it bore a single tagline, "No green rooms. No edits. Just truth." And though Michael never mentioned Jimmy by name again, everyone understood the origin story. There would be no revenge tour. No rivalry legacy. Just a singular moment in broadcast history when a man walked onto a stage built to contain him and instead transformed it into his own. A moment that wasn't loud, but was unforgettable. A mic drop that didn't bounce or echo, but landed with the weight of something final. Not because it destroyed someone, but because it forced everyone to finally look.